Hey everybody, thanks for joining us today at Book Blather. If you're new here, I'm Dave, this is Olive, and we talk about the books we've read or acquired recently to help spread the joy of reading. So, happy Garb August, everyone. It's the first day of August, but today is not a Garb August video. Today we wanted to discuss a few books that we read recently. We're almost caught up in our book reviews. We then have some short science fiction stuff to discuss, but then we're all caught up. So today we're talking about three books that we've read recently that sort of genre defying, I guess. That may be a little too bold of a statement, but ones that kind of basically touch on sci-fi or horror, but aren't really. Really sort of normal fiction books. So we'll get right into it. The first one we want to talk about is Love and Other Experiments by Sophie Ward. And so this is a one we read a few months ago. So this is the one that's going to be least fresh in our minds. But this book was about, I picked this book up because I keep lists on, I use, sometimes I'll put books that I want to read in Goodreads, but I usually use Amazon because I make different wish lists for different, so I can choose horror novellas, horror books, recent sci-fi, classic sci-fi. I can keep lists like that and bin stuff. And so anyway, so I had bin this, I think, in a list of short, like science fiction short stories. I had a couple books in there, and this was one of them. And so, but I put it in there a while back, and then picked it up finally and read it. And as I'm reading it, I'm like, why did I think that this was science fiction stories? It's not science fiction at all. But of course I kept reading it, and I'll get to that in a minute. It's a collection of stories, but they're all related. It's not really a short story anthology. What this is about is it centers around, all the stories center around these two characters, this couple, Eliza and Rachel. And Eliza is she's a scientist, she's a more, serious, rational of the two. And Rachel is the more sort of affectionate, emotional one of the pair. And the most of this sort of collection of stories centers around this event that happens where Rachel believes that one night an ant crawls into her eye and has gone inside her head. And it causes her problems in the future, headaches and things that she can't let go. And this is kind of the source of a lot of exploration of just, but being in a relationship and love and trust and the types of things you can accept. And because, Eliza does not believe that there's an ant crawling around in Rachel's head. And Rachel, this has become a very important part of her existence. And so, Eliza is faced with the struggle of, can she, even though she thinks it's ridiculous, like her rational mind thinks this can't possibly be true, should she just trust Rachel and accept this for the sake of their relationship? So I'm oversimplifying. There's a lot more to it than that, but I'm just saying that's kind of the basis of this exploration of this relationship. And so when you read the jacket of this book, it talks about that this is an exploration of across time, space, and perspective. And that's really what it is. So these different stories come at you from different perspectives. So there's Rachel and Eliza, but there's also, child, parents, friends. And so you see these, it's a series of stories. Each story starts off with a particular thought experiment, which is where the title comes from. So just to give you an example, one of them is a famous philosopher, Nagel, had posed the question, what is it like to be a bat? And so bat has a very different experience of life. And so can you even begin to really understand what it's like to live as a bat? Can you understand that experience? And so can you kind of extend that principle to people? And can you really understand what it's like to live with the experiences of a fellow human being? When you are not them. And so that's one of the thought experiments. So it'll start, one of the stories starts off with that thought experiment, and then there's a story that goes into it. And some of them are kind of directly related to the thought experiment. Some of them I couldn't quite see a very strong connection, but So they all start out like that, and then each one's a story, and they're all stories relating to this life of Eliza and Rachel, but you're seeing them from different people's perspectives at different times, and different things have happened. Sometimes very different things have happened. And so I went ahead and kept reading it, even though I'm like, why did I think this was sci-fi? But of course, by the time you're done, you're like, oh, I see. That's why somebody at some point must have called it sci-fi, and that's why it kind of is sci-fi. But that's not really this. It's really kind of just a sci-fi setting, if you will. But it's not really. This is a book for people that like sci-fi or people that don't like sci-fi. Science fiction does not play heavily into this story. Now, did I like the book? So sort of. This was a very unusual book. I think from what I just explained, you can tell. It's a very unusual book. This was published. I didn't mention it was relatively recent. It was published in 2020. It was longlisted for the Booker Prize. So I guess it's somewhat liked. And I guess I'm happy that I read it just because it was so unique. I didn't love it, but. It was interesting. It was interesting, and I think I'll leave it at that. I think you have to, based on the type of book that I just described, that is, you kind of have to decide whether that's the type of book for you. Because it read well. The writing was good, and it read well, and it kept me fairly engaged. I just wasn't wowed with it. But some people probably would be if you like that kind of story. So, yeah. So that was Love and Other Thought Experiments by Sophie Ward. Okay, the next book that we read is We Had to Remove This Post by Hanna Bervoets. And this is a pretty recent book. This was published in 2022. Actually, I don't know if it was originally published in 2022. This was originally written in Dutch and was translated. And this book, this had been on my radar because I had heard some stuff on it on BookTube a while back about, even somebody talking about how they in 10 pages in they threw it against the wall, threw it across the room or something, and I wanted to see kind of what that was about. And then Pac sent this to me. I think this was in the last package that she ever sent me. And so anyway, so we recently read this, and we did enjoy this. This was another original one, but again, I don't know what you would classify this as. It's disturbing. Maybe could say it's a horror, but not really. So what it's about is the main character works for a unnamed social media company, or Instagram or Facebook, something like that, and she and her fellow friends that you follow in the story are content moderators, right? So they are basically the ones behind the scenes that are getting in all this sort of just extreme or illegal or offensive content, and they have a very detailed, complex set of protocols that they follow in order to determine what can or cannot stay up or be posted. And so the story kind of deals with not just what happens to the main character. I forget her name, but not just what happens with her, but also to the people around her friend group around her. And you see her first when she first starts working for the company, when she has other relationships, and then as she's working for the company for a while, as she develops close relationships with her fellow co-workers, including a romantic relationship. And you see the effect this has on her and other people, constantly being exposed to this extreme material. And some of it is just all these sort of like conspiracy theories and things that they're constantly being hit with, like Holocaust denial, things like that, and some of that been what might offended people in this book. Some of those things being presented, and somebody throwing a book across the room. I'm not sure. That's probably what it was. So some of it is that, and what happens to them when they get constant exposure to some of that stuff. But a lot of it is also, in particular for main character, is sort of constantly being exposed to this all day long, sort of getting anesthetized to certain things in life and becoming sort of calloused, and what that can do not just to your behavior, but also your sort of perception of your own behavior. And it was a really interesting book, and it's pretty short, as you can see. And the end of the book, she actually gives. She had done a bunch of research for this, the author, and she gives some links where you can do further reading on this of some of the earlier studies that I guess were really on Facebook, because that was the first really big one, right? And so a lot of studies that were done about content moderators and content moderation back then, if you want to do for further reading. And so it was really interesting. It was a really interesting exploration of the people that are in that position and the trauma that they undergo as a result. So, didn't knock my socks off again, but I would recommend it. I think it's well worth reading, especially since it's not that long. Probably could have been a little longer, but so yeah, we had to remove this post by Hanna Bervoets. Okay, and the last one we wanted to talk about today is an older book. This is Never Let Me Go by Kazuo Ishiguro. Hope I pronounced that right. And so Ishiguro is a famous author, well-respected author. And this book, I think, is published in 2005. They've now made a movie out of it. I think it might be a Netflix movie. And it's basically what this story follows. It's mostly told as a flashback. So it follows these three people. Our main character, Kathy, and her two close friends, Ruth and Tommy. And they had spent their childhood together at this, basically, what seems to be a boarding school called Hailsham. And she is now a little older. She's a young adult, and she's acting as a carer that goes around taking care of people that are making anatomical donations. And so she is reflecting back on her time at Hailsham with her friends. And the story has some flipping back and forth. Some of it's going back to present time, and there is her ongoing story now as a carer as she is reflecting back on this and seeing her friends again. But most of it is told in the past, and it's about their time there. And it's somewhat of a mystery that gets very slowly revealed as time goes on about what Hailsham was and what they're doing there and what makes them special, as they had constantly been told by their guardians at the school. And so it turns out that this, again, is a science fiction setting. That's kind of the basis for the story, but that is not at all what the story is about. And it's, the story is really about it's about friendship and relationships, and I think a lot of it is because of the particular, I don't want to spoil too much, but because of the particular context that they're in, it kind of explores, these characters are always trying to figure out who they are, and then maybe later in time have some regrets, but they kind of have a different time scale, let's say. And so it almost seems to be sort of a metaphor of mortality, and that our time is limited, and the choices that we make, how we spend that time, and in particular the relationships that we develop with people, and the choices that we make, which may lead to regrets later on, is kind of all amped up for these particular students of this school. But I think that's really more what the story was meant to be, a commentary of. Now, this book, I always am hesitant giving reviews like this because this was a Man Booker Prize finalist, right? They made it into a movie. Obviously, a lot of people love this book, and he is a well-respected author. But I did not love this book, and there were several. It was okay, but there were several things about this book that I didn't like. And number one, I always feel weird saying this, right? Because he's a successful author and I'm not. But number one, I just had problems with the writing. I did not think mechanically the writing was so great. Very poor use of punctuation that made it not as easy to read. I didn't, some of it is tough to tell. So much of the story was dialogue, so sometimes that makes it tough to tell whether it's not the best writing, or it's just because that's just the way that people are speaking. So that was not that it was horrible writing, but it just wasn't. For a book as famous as this, I expect better. More importantly, I didn't really like a couple things. I didn't really like the style. It was told, so there was a lot of flashbacks, but it was sort of like flashbacks within flashbacks. So you'd have these scenes where she would go back, and so in this year this was happening, right? We were doing this thing, and this is what we always did, except for that one time. But I'll get back to that later. And then she tells a little bit more about that story, and then goes, but that other one time I wanted to tell you about was such and such happened. And then she gets towards the end of that, he gets towards the end of that, and it'll be like, but anyway, getting back to whatever. And so it'll be like your original timeline, a flashback, a slightly bit forward, then flashback, then all the way back again. And it's very disjointed, I thought. And the story already skipped around, jumped years and things. And so I really didn't like that style. But, maybe I wouldn't bother others so much. The other thing is, I didn't, maybe I just missed a lot in the story. But there was just a lot of it, the story, it wasn't short. And a lot of it was just would seem to be detailing, sort of mundane aspects of their lives, so some of this meant stuff, but some of it just seemed to be like, it's like a lot of mundanity, just talking about different, events and different things that didn't really seem to bear too much on the story or the message of the story. And so some of it, this book seemed like it certainly could have been shorter. I don't know. Maybe you need all that stuff to get, attached to the characters. I don't know, but some of it was a little bit of a slog for me to get through. I will say that the ending, a lot happened at the end. When you find out all the information, some of which you know by then, but you find out all the information at the end, and it's a little bit heartbreaking at the end. It's true. So maybe there is something to getting to know those characters over time. But it was okay. I wouldn't tell anybody not to read it, but I didn't love it. I don't know if I'm going to read anything else by this author anytime soon. But so that was our that was our thought on Never Let Me Go by Kazuo Ishiguro. So that's it. That's 3 books reviewing for today. And so, as I said, we're into Garbo August. You'll be seeing some Garbo August videos from us. We'll finish up our reviews from recent reads, and a lot of tags we got to get to. So a lot coming up as always. But if you have any comments about any of these books, we'd love to hear them. Leave us a comment below. Or if you don't want to leave anything substantive, you can always leave Olive a puppy emoji. She always likes to see those. Right, Olive? You always like to see the puppy emojis. So thanks so much for watching. We'll see you very soon. But in the meantime, take care of yourselves and each other, and we'll see you next time.